like to also welcome those of you who are joining us by video. I hope you have been excited about this the last several weeks as we've been talking. And I didn't do a very good job in inviting you to participate to give, but if you've been online or you want to go online today, there is an opportunity for you still to give. If you go on our website, you'll see special Bible, special gift Bible. You can click on that and give to this effort. So again, thank you. I just celebrate this offering. Well, it's the last Sunday of December. It's the last Sunday of the year. It's the last Sunday of the decade. Are you ready? For what? Good question. Good question. You're getting to know me. Be careful with what you answer. Are you ready is the question I want to ask this morning. Are we ready? Now, that could apply to a variety of things. Are we ready? There have been some big decisions happening in our church lately. Safe to say over the past, well, for some very recently, in the past week or so, for some in the past month or so, but there have been some exciting things happening in our church. Are you ready might apply to, are you ready to get married? We've got a couple of couples that have just taken that big step and saying, yes, we are. And we're excited about that. I could ask you on the other side of the emotional gamut, are you ready? Because as Jennifer's already alluded to, yesterday we said goodbye to one. Not forever, thankfully. So the question would be, are you ready to meet the Lord in a new way today? If He called you home today, if something happened and today was the day you would meet Him in person in a whole new way, are you ready? I could ask you, are you ready to step into the 2020s? It's hard to believe. I feel like I'm still getting used to the 2010s. And here we are, right on the threshold of stepping into 2020. I could ask you, in light of the jerseys a few of you have worn today, are you ready for your team to take the next step? Are you ready for a new national champion or a repeating national champion in college football? There's all kinds of ways I could ask that, and some of those more serious than others. But again, the question is, are you ready? Are you ready? Are we ready? Now maybe you're picking up on that, the direction I'm headed. Because I'm asking you, are you ready? But then I keep coming back and saying, are we ready, Jack? Are we ready? That means us. Are we ready together? So we took a little bit of a break with Christmas. We took a little bit of a break with Christmas, and we celebrated the coming of Jesus, His birth. By the way, if you didn't have a chance to join us, we had a wonderful Christmas Eve service. At least, I don't know, 35 or more show up on Christmas Eve. A great gathering. Just a kind of a quiet, unplugged, non-production kind of evening. And we just celebrated together. But when we come together today, right on the threshold of a lot of new things, an opportunity to step into, in fact, not just an opportunity, it's coming whether we like it or not, the reality that we're stepping into a lot of newness. Once again, I want to ask us, are we ready? Now let me invite you, before we took the brief break to celebrate Christmas, we've been looking through Ephesians, the letter Paul wrote to the Ephesians, and I'll invite you to turn there if you have your Bible with you. We are in Ephesians chapter 4 today, in particular, starting in verse 17. Ephesians 4:17. And in the New Living Translation, it reads this way. With the Lord's authority, I say this, live no longer as the Gentiles do, for they are hopelessly confused. Their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life God gives because they have closed their minds and hardened their hearts against Him. They have no sense of shame. They live for lustful pleasure and eagerly practice every kind of impurity. But that isn't what you learned about Christ. Or to read that a little differently, that isn't what you learned about Christ. Since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from Him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. Put on your new nature. There's that word new again. Put on your new nature. What is that new nature? And what are we being asked to put on? What is Paul encouraging the Ephesians, and what is our challenge today as we prepare to step into a lot of newness? And what in particular is your pastor asking you when he says, are you and are we ready? Are we ready? What is this whole business about Paul saying, live no longer as the Gentiles do? Let me say that differently. Live no longer as, and you fill in the blank. If I said to you, live no longer as, doesn't that imply that apparently you have been living that way? Live no longer. Oh. So what's he saying? He's calling us to change. He's saying there's another newness coming, and I want you to live no longer the way you've been living. For they're hopelessly confused. In some of your translations, it talks about the futility of their mind. In other words, there's something about their thinking that just hadn't been right. There's something about the thinking that Paul is addressing, and he's saying, don't think that way anymore. Don't keep thinking that way. Let's think differently. Well, again, if you're just reading along and you're trying to follow this, you'd be asking yourself, well, don't think like what? What is he calling us to change? Then he says their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life God gives because they've closed their minds and hardened their hearts against Him. They've closed their minds and hardened their hearts against Him. What is that all about? Closed their minds and hardened their hearts against Him. He talks about a few things here. He says they live for lustful pleasure and eagerly practice every kind of impurity. But that isn't what you learned about Christ. Since you've heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from Him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life. And then he gets into, again, this changing of our attitudes, this changing of the way we're thinking. And if you're one that likes to study more in depth what you're hearing, if you like to look at other places, I encourage you to look to that Bible passage that we're all maybe familiar with. And that is in Romans 12. Romans 12, 1 and 2 is a really powerful call to change. So I'm going to flip over to that just a minute and invite you to do the same if you have it. Romans 12 says, and so, dear brothers and sisters, meaning he's writing to those who are already a part of the faith. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all He has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind He will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship Him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world. And again, there's something about the way of the world. There's something about the way things used to be in the way we live. Something about the way we used to think and maybe the attitude that we used to have. Don't conform to that any longer. Change. Change the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. What is it that He's talking about? What is He calling us to do differently? You may remember In our earlier study of Ephesians, matter of fact, in the beginning of chapter 4, he said, I beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling. And we talked maybe a little bit about what that means. Who are we called to be? What's he expecting of us? What is he wanting us to step into? What way of thinking? What way of approaching life? Now let me get you to flip a little farther back. I'm going to jump around a little bit this morning. Go to the letter of 1 Peter. In particular, chapter 1, 1 Peter. Very back of the Bible. Just before 2 Peter, Jude, and Revelation. Really far back in the Bible. 1 Peter says this. Chapter 1, verse 18. For you know that God paid a ransom to save you from the empty life you inherited from your ancestors. You know that God paid a ransom to save you from the empty life you inherited from your ancestors. Well, two questions jump out of that passage to me. One, what is this empty life from our ancestors? Why is this yet another instruction from a third writer challenging us to leave behind whatever it is that we used to think, whatever attitudes we used to hold, whatever we inherited from our ancestors? There's something he's really saying leave behind to step into. And again, this is the third writer. And then he says this, for you know that God paid a ransom to save you from that empty life. Well, I don't know exactly what he's talking about, but I can just read the words. From an empty life tells me it's not going anywhere. It's kind of futile, right? You're leaving the empty life. I mean, I think about when we talk about purpose and meaning. You know, you're talking to somebody who's maybe changing jobs, or maybe they're going to school. Maybe they're moving to a new place. Maybe there's something about their life that they're wanting to say, and this just hasn't worked out. I'm looking for a change. I'd like to step into something new. I'm hoping that this will give me new purpose and meaning. What is it? And why did someone have to pay a ransom? That God paid a ransom to save us from this empty life. Well, by this point in time, it ought to be pretty easy, if you're tracking with me at all, to know right on the heels of the holiday we just celebrated, the ransom paid for us is Jesus, right? He came to us for the express purpose, the full intent to teach us not only how to step out of where we were and live a new life, but that he paid the price to enable us to do that. So we know that. That's old news about Christmas. But what is the new news? I mean, I won't take an actual poll. I want to ask you to actually raise your hands this morning. And to the question, have you been saved? The traditional question that Christians ask. Maybe the traditional question that people expect the church to ask them. Are you saved? Have you been saved? Meaning, no longer, but new, right? Have you been saved? But if you've been saved, then what? Now there's a question worth contemplating. If you've been saved from what was, what are you saved to? Well, heaven, Pastor. I mean, that's pretty easy. Is that it? No, not at all. And I don't mean to short sell heaven. I don't mean to say at all that heaven isn't an incredibly wonderful place. But I guess what I'm asking this morning, is it just simply a transaction? Is it just simply a no to what was and a yes to what will be? Because if it is, unless today's your day, there's a big gap in between what was and what will be. And I'm getting clearly, Pastor, from this morning, you haven't said exactly what it is, but you've sure hammered the point home. Leave what was behind to step into, are you ready? Leave what was, step into the new, are you ready? So here's the question. What is the in-between? What are we saved from in order to be saved to? Between now and the time we see Virgil again, when we're with Jesus in a new way. What is it? Well, let me invite you to hear it from his own words, from his own mouth, and that is in the Gospel of John. Jesus said this when he was talking to his closest friends. In the Gospel of John, I'm in chapter 15, and Jesus said this in a really intimate situation, a really intimate gathering, one we usually talk about toward another important holiday, in fact, the most important Christian holiday, Easter. Right leading up to that, we talk about this passage, so here we are talking about it the Sunday right after Christmas. Jesus said this to his closest disciples. John 15:9, I have loved you even as the Father loved me. Remain in my love. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love. And then he jumps, I'm jumping a little bit farther, and he talks about that there is no greater love than anyone could have than to lay down their life for their friends. That's in verse 13. But here's the verse I really want you to hear. Jesus said to these guys that were gathered around that could be hearing the same thing we're hearing today. Matter of fact, they've been hearing it over and over and over and over as they've been living and walking with Jesus. Leave the old and step into the new. He says this, you are my friends if you do what I command. You are my friends if you do what I command. You know, this time of year is when we do resolutions, right? And you'd expect, maybe at New Year's time, you'd expect a sermon on resolutions. But I'm like all the rest of everybody who's tried resolutions. The following Sunday, we got to have a different sermon because those resolutions are already gone, you know. But I wonder if this year we might do something different. Instead of making a resolution that's new, instead of trying to say, you know, I'd really like to do this that I haven't done, or I'd like to change the way I've done that, or what I really hope for, maybe we take a very old one and we simply renew it in our lives. Maybe we make our resolution for this year to simply follow what Jesus has asked us to do. Because he says right here, you be my friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I bring up this whole resolutions because anytime a church starts talking about something new, it often involves a mission statement. It often involves maybe a change in vision. You know, you try to cast this vision so the church will know, hey, this is what we're going to do in the next whatever period of time. And a lot of churches do it right now because we're stepping into a new year and it's the perfect time to make a change. But I wonder what if we captured something we've already been given and just renewed it for ourselves. You know this well, it's at the end of Matthew's Gospel. Because if Jesus is saying to us, you're my friends if you do what I command, then maybe you'll hear in your mind today him say to those same disciples right before he left them, I've been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I've given you. And be sure of this, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. He didn't put a term limit on that. He didn't say this is just for the next year. He didn't say this is just a short-term command. He said teach them everything. Teach them all the commands. Teach them to obey them. All the commands. So in a real way, Church 180, We already have a mission statement. We already have what God is expecting us to step into. We already have what Jesus has asked us to do, and that's to follow Him and obey all the commands that He's given us. And He'll call us our friends, His friends. Now, we sang a song in honor of Virgil, one that Joe told us he really liked. What a friend we have in Jesus. Let me flip that around this morning and ask you, could he sing the same about us? What a friend we have in Jesus. Could he sing, what a friend I have in Terry? What a friend I have in Sean. What a friend I have in Rhonda. And if he sang that, what would he be saying? We just heard his words. What would he be implying if he said, what a friend I have in Duncan? Apparently, Duncan follows my commands. Apparently, Duncan does what I have taught. It seems like an incredibly simple thing. Is that what all this call to something new is? Is that what all this call to step into something new? Is that what all this leave behind and step into the new is all about? Just doing what He's taught us to do? I mean, isn't there something new? Isn't there a different way of looking at this? Isn't there a new catch? Surely there's a new angle on this. Why today, to a church full of at least some, maybe all of us, that have been following Jesus for a while, why would we be saying something that's so obvious and so simple? Maybe it's not so simple. Maybe, in fact, if we remember why He came, to save all, and He chose us as the body, we've been talking about that in Ephesians. Paul has been calling the Ephesian church to live a life worthy of their calling. In other words, to be who God's called them to be, to continue His work, continue His mission, reaching out to others. How are we going to do that? How are we going to do that unless we're a friend of His and we can accurately represent what He's taught us? And again, I can tell you, from the few conversations that I've had with people who don't really know Him, I mean, I'm not talking about people who aren't following Him, but I'm talking about people who don't know Him. They don't know Him at all. Again, I'm not talking about people who have said, absolutely not. I'm talking about people who just don't know Him. What do you say to them? What do you say to them when they ask, why do you do what you do? Why do you put so much effort into following Jesus? What does He offer? Why should I give up who I am to be who He wants me to be? Well, we can tell them, maybe. But how much more effective if we showed them? And so you come back to a very simple message. Okay, Reed, you're asking us to show them who Jesus is. And you're telling us that Jesus said we're His friends if we do what He said. We do follow His commandments. And this whole business about leaving the old and stepping in the new means I shouldn't just keep sinning. I ought to do something different that gets away from that old way. But I'm just struggling this morning, I guess, Reed, to understand what it is at this critical moment you're asking us to do. Then let me encourage you to hear this. Jesus called us to follow and to obey everything He taught. And I know you've heard this before because I've asked it, maybe others have asked it of you too. Is it possible? Is it possible to do all that he taught us? That's a real question. Is it possible for you and me to do everything he's called us to do? Not of ourselves, that's true. And just like when we started this and I said, the writer of Ephesians says, don't live any longer the way, implies that you've been living that way. So if Jim says we're not by ourselves, indicates to me, yes, the answer is yes, we can, just not on our own. But let me ask the question again. Is it possible for you and for me to actually do all of what Jesus has called us to do? I don't think we ask ourselves that question enough. I think, in fact, at least I've been challenged, not just as a pastor, but as a follower. I've been really challenged to ask myself, have I asked myself that question? Is it possible for me to really follow all that he's taught me to do? Even if I take his summing up, which says love God with all that you are and love others as yourself, is it possible for us to do that? Again, why, Pastor, are you harping on this? What are you getting at? I'm getting at this, friends. I know this is a truth about me, and I'm guessing it's a truth about you. And I don't mean this in criticism. I mean it in love and as an invitation. Somehow I think the church, big, large, somehow I think we as Christians have maybe stopped believing that that's possible. I think we as a whole have stopped believing that we can actually do all of what Jesus has called us to do. And so what better thing in terms of a resolution and preparing to step into this new year than to ask ourselves, if he's my Lord, if he has saved me from something and he's saving me to something, and that is a new way of life, if he is promising me all that he's promised, and he's promising you the same thing, and he said, just follow me. Well, then if I don't really believe it's possible, even with the Holy Spirit that he's given me, if I don't really believe it's possible, how likely am I to really pursue it? How likely is it to become my primary agenda? How likely is it to radically rearrange my thinking? How likely is it that I am actually witnessing to people who don't know him by living in such a starkly different way of living that people automatically know who he is? They may not know his name, but they can see who he is. Because no matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing, no matter what crowd I'm in the middle of, no matter where or when or with whom or how, when they watch me, they say he's different. What's different about him? Man, he really stands out in a crowd. Did they say that about us? Did they say that about you? Did they say that about me? I was at a restaurant just a few days ago with some friends. Some of you. And I wondered, I mean, the restaurant was packed. We had to wait a while, you know, it's that time of year. And I wonder how many people are looking at us, are looking at me and going, oh, man, he's different. Nobody bit. Boy, that was a perfect opportunity to say, yeah, Pastor, they all wonder, what's up with you, man? You're really different. That dude's weird.
You're waiting on Jay to say.
Yeah, you're waiting on Jay to say. You hear what I'm asking? How many of us live in such a way that isn't, I don't mean different as in, oh gosh, there that person is again. I don't mean that kind of different. I mean that people would say, wow, he or she is really, wonder what makes them that way. I'd like to get to know. I really would like to know, what is it about them? I made such a deal about a Bible for every believer. I've made such a deal about saying I can't imagine becoming a new follower of Jesus and not even knowing how to do that because I don't have His Word to teach me. And it really strikes me that as the writer to the Ephesians says, put behind you all that and put on a new nature, created to be like God. That's maybe sounds good, but that's so weird. That's so strange. That's really created to be like God. I'm not even sure that I can accept that I can do all that He's commanded me to do. Created to be like God. And I've got the Bible to study. And you've got the Bible to study. How impacted are we by it? How much do we put stock into this teaching? That's part of why I sent you in all these different places, so that you see the consistency of this message. Because if I'm expected to change, if I've invited to change, and He's going to help me really become like He wants me to become, don't I have to do this first? Don't I have to decide in my mind that it's actually possible? And don't I have to believe in my heart that He really can do this? That I can become radically different. And that might be a blessing to other people. Me. You. It's just us. Could we become like this?
No.
If you could have heard, some of you did, but if you could have heard just a summary of what was said about our friend Virgil yesterday, I was feverishly writing down as speaker after speaker after speaker was talking. Let me just tell you a real quick summary. He was patient. He had a passion for God's Word. He loved others. He prayed for others all the time. When he was drafted into the Air Force, he took his Bible with him and had it with him all the time. He genuinely impacted the lives of others because he was selfless. He cared more about other people than he did himself. He was a gentle man as well as a gentleman. he could dialogue with you. He could carry on a dialogue with you in which he was actually correcting you. He was pushing back. But he did it in a gentle way. Firm but gentle. Maybe even forceful but kind. He was unmoving in his beliefs. Man, if I just wrote all those things and held it up and said, okay, 180, this is who we're going to be this year. I don't even have to go to this. How about that? And there's my point. There's my point. Let me say it again if you missed it. I don't know how in the world, because I don't even know how in the world. But if he could, not on his own, so can I. So can we. So can you. Wouldn't it be awesome someday to have people stand up at your funeral and at my funeral and go on and on and on about all these things while saying he wasn't perfect? No offense, Rouge. But he had this much of an impact. Friends, Jesus called us. I can call you by name, most of you. He's called us to be this kind of a blessing. But we got to believe it first. We got to believe that we actually can be. So instead of a new resolution, as we step into the new year, we step into the new decade, we leave behind all that was old and everything you and I both maybe like to forget about or change. Maybe this year we make the commitment to actually believe what Jesus has said. I want you. I died to make it possible for you. And I gave my own spirit to you so that you could not only do this, you could do this. Man, what a blessing we could be. Lord, what a friend we have in you. What a friend we have in you.